Summary of the Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. In the book The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus tries to explain what he means by absurdism and, later in the book, to think about how people can deal with the ridiculous. People often think that the ridiculous is just the idea that life has no point. In fact, Camus describes the absurd as the clash between man's need for reasoning, meaning, and order and the world's inability to meet this need. Camus thinks that facing the absurd is more important than any other intellectual problem because it is connected to death. He says that people kill themselves when they feel like life has no point, and sometimes to support the point they do think it has, like when someone dies for a political cause. If life is useless, which Camus agrees with, is it reasonable or even dutiful to kill yourself? Camus shows how people try to ignore the absurd by turning to religion and hoping for a better life that never comes. Camus wants to know if it's possible to live with the full knowledge that life has no point. Soren Kierkegaard, Lev Chestov, Karl Jaspers, and Edmund Husserl are some of the thinkers whose work Camus looks at. Camus says that all of these showed in some way how silly life is. But each of them has a deadly flaw. They were too afraid to accept that life is silly, so they took a leap of faith, usually to God, to give the world purpose. They try to find meaning in things that don't have any, which Camus thinks is illogical. Camus says that the ridiculous life has three main parts: revolt, freedom, and emotion. To live an absurd life, you have to fight the urge to look for reasons or explanations, act and think freely, and go after life with desire. In The Absurd Man, Camus tries to move toward a more useful way of thinking about the absurd by giving examples of people who, in his opinion, have found ways to live with the absurd. For Camus, it's not about finding a way out of the ridiculous. Instead, it's about living a life in which you are always aware of how useless life is. As an example, he first looks at Don Juan, who was known for seducing women. He hails Don Juan for putting number over quality in his life. Since no experience is inherently better than any other, the crazy man should try to have as many experiences as he can. This means that Don Juan should have sex with as many different people as possible. Camus also uses actors and conquerors as examples of people who live strange lives. Actors live in the present and try out many different lives, and conquerors' political and violent battles make life more urgent and vivid. Camus then talks about the connection between the ridiculous and the act of making something. Camus says that the creative life is the most absurd of all. Artists put a lot of energy into their work, even though it doesn't mean anything in the end. The artist can only experience and describe, not explain and solve. Camus doesn't like works that are smug about proving a certain truth. Camus looks at the works of the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky through this lens. Specifically, he looks at Kirillov, a figure from The Possessed who does something like logical suicide. Kirillov thinks that God must exist for life to have any purpose. But Kirillov has a gut feeling that there is no God, so he chooses to take charge and kill himself. His last words were "all is well," which, according to Camus, are exactly what it takes to live with absurdity. Camus praises Dostoevsky for putting the absurd into action, which is something that books can do better than theory. However, Camus attacks Dostoevsky for going back to God later in his life. In the last part of his article, Camus talks about the myth of Sisyphus, which is stated in the title. Sisyphus was a Greek king who was told by the gods to do hard work. In the end, he had to push a rock up a mountain, but it kept falling back down, so he had to do it all over again and again until the end of time. There are different stories about why the gods were angry with Sisyphus, but in the end, it was because he treated them badly. One story says that he put death in chains, which made Pluto very angry. Just before he died, Sisyphus wanted to see how much his wife cared about him by telling her to put his unburied body in the middle of a public park. Because it made him mad that she didn't bury him properly, he asked Pluto for permission to go back to Earth and punish her. Sisyphus fell in love with the earth again when he came back from the grave, especially with its natural beauty, and he didn't want to leave. Mercury was sent to get Sisyphus, and when he got back to the abyss, his rock and the endless, pointless work it represents were waiting for him. Camus sees in this fate the fight of a man who wants to find meaning in a world without meaning. Camus says that Sisyphus is the ultimate absurd hero, because he knows that everything he does is pointless. Camus is most interested in the part of the story when Sisyphus goes back to the foot of the mountain. This is Sisyphus' hour of consciousness and the moment when he fully understands his fate. Camus imagines Sisyphus saying, "All is well," just like Kirillov did. According to Camus, it is essential to imagine Sisyphus happy.
About the author. Albert Camus was born in Algeria while it was still a French colony. When Camus was very young, his father, Lucien, died in World War I. Camus was raised by his mother, a housekeeper who couldn't read or write. Camus was accepted to the University of Algiers because he was good at school. Here, he learned to care about politics and joined the Communist Party, then the Algerian People's Party. He got tuberculosis in 1930, which made him stop playing soccer. He was a good goalie, and forced him to go to school part-time. In 1936, he got his diploma. Camus joined the French resistance at the start of World War II. He worked for a secret resistance newspaper and became its director in 1943. During his military service, he also met the philosophical philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. Camus wrote The Myth of Sisyphus in 1942. It was the first of a number of works that tried to figure out what life is all about and explain Camus' theory of absurdism. In the same year, he also put out his first book, The Outsider, which is also called The Stranger. After the plague in 1947, The Fall came out in 1952. Camus won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957. After Rudyard Kipling, he was the second youngest winner. In 1960, he was killed in a car crash.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.